Today I'm talking to Barry Gardiner, who's a Labour Member of Parliament and one of the very few MPs to have voted against the intervention in Libya. Mr Gardiner, thanks for talking to RT today. Now we see that the rebels, if we can still call them that, have practically taken Tripoli and that Gaddafi looks like he's lost the fight. Have you changed your mind about the Libyan intervention?
The point is the legitimacy of it, and that's what I queried in the beginning. I think most people would agree that it was right to intervene on humanitarian grounds to save the people of Benghazi. That was never the issue. The issue was always whether NATO should then become involved as effectively the strike force for the rebel cause. And that's what it's been. And that, of course, was, in my view, way beyond the brief that the United Nations had given. And it was wrong. It was not that this should have been about regime change. A civil war in Libya is something for them. It's not something for the rest of the world to intervene on.
How do you wish it could have been different then? What would you have done if you'd been in charge?
I think what we should have seen is an intervention by the forces that went in to stop that attack on Benghazi, to neutralize Gaddafi and to make sure that he then did not conduct any aggressive sorties as he had previously been doing. But not that they should then become the air arm, the strike force for the rebels.
David Cameron said a few days ago that NATO would lend support in Libya for as long as civilians need protecting. What was your reaction to that? Is that as open-ended a commitment as it sounds?
Well, look, it was very clear in the original UN resolution. It was very clear when our Prime Minister spoke in Parliament here that there would be no occupation force. That would be totally wrong. One of the things that troubled me always was this ambivalence as to whether there should be troops on the ground. And of course that wasn't expressly prohibited by the resolution, but it was something that I think all of us were very concerned about. What we saw as the rebels were going into Tripoli the other day, certainly on the radio programs that were broadcast in the UK, we heard go left, go left, go left. These instructions being yelled out by what were obviously British soldiers, British personnel, who were leading that advance group. Now, that I think is where we've overstepped the line.
There's also now talk of putting peacekeeping forces on the ground in Libya. I assume that's something you oppose, but in a decimated country with no structures for maintaining order now, is that not the only way?
Well, no, I don't believe it is. I don't believe it's right that we should be staying there effectively to establish the new regime. That's not what this was originally about. It was about humanitarian protection. Now, let me be clear. I'm very pleased to see the back of Gaddafi. He was a very evil dictator. The sooner he is in front of the International Criminal Court, the better. And I'm very glad that his days are now at an end. I wish the new regime well, but I think it's important that they establish their regime, that they prove to the international community that they have the capacity not to tear themselves into different factions and to rule Libya as a strong and unified government. But that's their responsibility.
You supported the invasion of Iraq back in 2003. Why is this so different?
No, it's very different. Look, the invasion of Iraq was because Saddam Hussein had refused to reveal, as he was obliged to under Chapter 7 of the United Nations resolution, whether or not he had got rid of the nuclear, chemical and biological weapons that we knew he had previously embarked upon. He refused to do that. Even as late as February, Hans Blix was saying, we do not know whether he still has these. He listed a whole load of VX nerve gas, mustard gas, different agents, chemical agents. So we didn't know, and he was not willing to allow other countries to come to interview the scientists, to see the audit trails, to know whether he'd got rid of them or not. In that situation, it would have been ludicrous to have had a 1 million-strong army that was on the doorstep of Iraq simply go away when the resolution 1441 had given him a final opportunity to comply with his obligations. Had the world done that, then what would have happened is he would have simply rebuilt those programs with impunity, knowing that he was absolutely untouchable and the world would not do anything against him. We would have then been precipitated into a far more major conflict in the Middle East between Iran and Iraq, with devastating consequences, disruption of the world's oil supplies. It was a terrible situation, and it was right that we took the action that we did. Now, the fact that the United Nations didn't sanction it in terms of a second resolution does not change the fact that the 1441 said it was the final opportunity for him to comply. Now, I'm a parent. I have children. I know that if I tell my children, please come and do the washing up, and they don't do it, and I say, look, I've told you once already, please come and do the washing up, if you have 12 years of that, which is what we had with Saddam Hussein, and you then come to the point where you say, this is your final chance, and he still does not comply, then it's important that you take the ultimate sanction after that.
What about what happened afterwards, though? In both Iraq and Afghanistan, the real violence began after the dictatorships were toppled. Do you see that happening in Libya?
I think there is a danger of this, and what you saw certainly in Iraq was a complete failure of the occupying powers then to stabilize the situation. They let the Iraqi army keep their weapons, but they disbanded the army. They said you must go back to your villages, but you can keep your weapons. This was insanity, absolutely insanity. And we must not be in a position where what we've done is created greater instability in Libya. That is absolutely clear. But nonetheless, what we equally must avoid is becoming an occupation force. I think Afghanistan is a very good example. Russia has very bitter experience of Afghanistan, as does Britain, of being an occupying power. And you start off being a friend of someone, and you end up being hated by everyone. An occupying force is a very dangerous place to be, and you should get out as quickly as you can.
What's the middle way then? Some would argue that NATO stepping in has made this situation worse. Is it not then NATO's responsibility to stay and clear up the mess?
You pose the age-old question that really is, how do you get to where you want to be? And of course the answer is, well, I wouldn't have started from here. But you're right, we're now in this situation, and therefore what we have to do is to ensure that we provide support for stability without ourselves being that stabilizing military force. It must not be that the new government relies on the military of Britain and NATO in order to maintain power. They must be able to do that on their own. We can give advice, we can give help to help them stabilize the situation, but we must not assume that responsibility ourselves.
Governments insist that lessons were learnt from what happened in Iraq, but given the way that this conflict's been conducted, do you believe that?
Look, it's always a danger for every government, in my view, and every army to be fighting the last war. What you do is you learn lessons from one conflict, which you then take on to the next, but usually what you forget is that the context and the situation is different the next time. And therefore the lessons that you've learned from the previous experience may not be appropriate in the conflict that you're now fighting.
You mentioned the factions inside the National Transitional Council. We now know that some of those factions are religious groups who hope to establish an Islamic state in Libya. What will the attitude to that be, do you think, both from NATO and from the Libyans themselves? Will they get a voice in this new democracy?
Well, it's not for NATO or anybody else to allow it. It's for the people of Libya to decide what they want to do. It's for them to decide their own future. And look, we in this country, in the UK, and all across the world, people have had to learn to live with pluralism, with the fact that we have different religious views, different ethical views, but nonetheless, we have to live together. We have to find some means of sharing a society, sharing a country, and making it work for all of us. I believe the people of Libya are no less capable of doing that than the people of America or the people of the United Kingdom.
Do you think that ultimately NATO's intervention will cause more trouble in the Middle East, a region that is, after all, already deeply unstable?
No, I think the most serious, I think it will if NATO stays there as an occupation force, but I don't think that is going to happen. I think the really troubling conflicts in the Middle East at the moment are within Syria. I think if you look at Bahrain and the way in which Saudi Arabia went into Bahrain to prop up the oligarchy there against the wishes of the people, these are the flashpoints in the Middle East that still have not burst asunder. That is going to happen. Once people have scented revolution, once they have seen that freedom and a better life is possible, I don't think they will go back under the yoke of autocracy.
Barry Gardiner, thank you very much.